Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Short. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Senior Rehab Podcast. And yes, this one's a little different. We are starting Senior Rehab Shorts. This is not an article of clothing. It is a short episode where I intend to read interesting articles or blog posts that I don't necessarily agree with, but I enjoyed reading. I figured, I spent a lot of time, throughout the months reading, different things just to learn myself and to be able to share with you all. But, if I record this, me reading, these posts, I could kill three birds with one stone. I could benefit myself. I could benefit you all just by having an audio recording of some really useful information that you may not have time to read. And I can also help the authors out by getting the word out of what they're writing about and just their message. Because it's so easy for some of these amazing blog posts to be released, and they may get, a week or 2 weeks of readership, and then they're just kind of lost in the interwebs. And I hope to kind of create a space to share some of my favorite articles and some of your favorite articles and blog posts as well. So if there are some blog posts that come to mind that you would love to have an audio file for, or if there's some that you just haven't got around to reading, go ahead and make sure that you join the Facebook group. This is where I want to kind of field requests for reading. So if you haven't yet, go to seniorrehabproject.com. There will be links that will say join the movement. If you join the movement, you subscribe to the newsletter, you also get access to the private Facebook group, the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group. So go ahead and do that. And let me know what you'd want read, and I'll go ahead and put it on the queue and get to it, eventually. These short episodes may also evolve into some ramblings by myself and potentially others, but I don't want to have a specific format for these, but just kind of play it by ear, release them whenever I want to or whenever I can. So don't expect too much, or don't expect a lot of consistency, but I'll do my best to read these articles and just provide some thoughts and potentially some questions. So first article this go-around is going to be by Neil Maltby. He is in the UK, has an awesome blog, the Becoming More Human blog.wordpress.com. He wrote a pretty awesome article called The Trigger, But Why? Goal! I couldn't believe it. I'd scored twice in one match. My surprise gives insight into both my footballing ability and defensive team role. After the game, immediately I began my deep-seated human search for meaning. What had caused this blip in my performance? What was the trigger? How can I ride this wave of form? So the search for narrative began. Could it be my fitness? Rejected. Heavier and slower than ever. My preparation? Unlikely. I'd been drinking the night before and had a fry-up that morning. Could it be luck? Why? This search for causality is all too common in healthcare and no less complex. Healthcare professionals and patients are keen to find the trigger. But what when there is none? Take low back pain, for example. It exists, but scientifically there is no cause for it on a population level, just multiple correlations. It is medically unexplained, so there is no trigger, or we haven't found one, just a complex mix of possible ingredients. Even symptoms we can explain, like rheumatological, autoimmune, respiratory disorders, to some degree succumb eventually to the why question. For instance, we know Parkinson's is caused by dopamine-releasing cell death, but why that happens is not medically explained. Why? It's like listening to my 4-year-old son. Early in the subjective, once the length of symptoms have been detailed with, we often probe for a trigger. Was there trauma around onset? Change in activity levels or environment? All too often in my clinic, the patient describes an insidious onset with no trigger, or at best clutches straws at a tenuous narrative, usually prefaced with, the only thing I can think of is, which leaves big questions. Why me? Why now? Why this knee, not the other? What is it? What should I avoid? What is the prognosis? How can you help? How do I live now? How will this affect me? Often they have no narrative to express their experience. This lack of explanation leaves space for catastrophizing, worry, anxiety, and self-doubt. It can also devastate social interaction. With no story, they can develop feelings of being misunderstood by family, loved ones, reduce social confidence, and increasing physical and or social isolation. Massively vulnerable, they become open to any narrative that helps express themselves in their search for meaning. Often they come with a disparate tale concocted from feelings, friends, family, media, and previous healthcare providers. These can range from the bizarre to the sublime. It always intrigues me. Patients can make sense of tissue damage in the absence of injury or a postural problem when symptoms fail to reflect this. Sometimes these stories can be a mountain at their gates, difficult to see beyond or move. A sense of complexity is regularly experienced but often abandoned. A case study from a typical patient in my clinic illustrates this complexity well. Mrs. Multifidus, 54 years old, presents with 24-year history of low back pain with insidious worsening over the last 6 months. She contributes this to a change in job 10 months ago to something heavier. She has had an MRI prior to physical therapy, which shows mild to moderate, normal, degenerative changes. She has been off work. She's a healthcare assistant for the whole 6 months, has stopped the gym, and reduced her walking and playing with grandkids. She is taking amitriptyline and cocodamol for pain control and to help sleep. I apologize, I'm horrible at pronouncing medications. She lives with her husband and looks after her grandkids a bit. Historically, this is where my subjective ends. What's missing? Well, she has gained 1 stone recently, smokes 15 cigarettes a day, hadn't slept well for a long time before pain onset, describes likely menopausal symptoms, reports prolonged significant stress, describes feeling run down, poor dietary intake, mainly convenience and processed foods, and family history of low back pain and fibromyalgia. A lot more going on now. Am I looking for a trigger, or is it more complex than this? When looking at biological systems, complexity surrounds us: cardiovascular, metabolic, muscular, nervous, immune, skeletal, endocrine, hormonal, digestive, respiratory, reproductive, lymphatic, and tegumentary. Each of these systems breaks down further into subsystems. Conservatively, I tally at least 8 systems implicated from her subjective history. The person, unlike the brain, knows little of these systems, like blood pressure, platelet count, peak flow, blood sugar level. They embody the objective experience not through minute detail, but collated consciousness: headache, bruising, lightheaded, lethargic. Maybe this is key to our efficiency. For the same processing level, humans are 1 and 1/1,000,000th more efficient than supercomputers. Therefore, the more objective abnormality exists, like medical history, the more complicated the conscious interpretation will be. Can we help reduce objective abnormality? Can we identify, and do we need a trigger? Are we better attending the individual, their story, and possible ingredients? Can we help construct a narrative the patient can express easily? So how helpful is describing injury, pain, and pathology in terms of 1 or 2 systems, like musculoskeletal, or if you're really trendy, 3, neuromusculoskeletal? Perhaps it makes the narrative easier for the patient to understand. Perhaps it's easier for us to understand, but this does not sit well. If biomechanical load is a trigger for pain and injury, why do we struggle for causal data? Because of the terms mechanical origin, load is often entwined with biomechanical and musculoskeletal systems, but cardiovascular, metabolic, respiratory, psychosocial systems can also be stressed. In causal terms, are we mechanically load-centric? Maybe the best interventions are those which improve multiple systems. Exercise, for example, is likely to have a significant positive impact on at least 8 biological systems as well as psychosocial benefits. A good reason not to be loadophobic. Since the goal-scoring feat, my performance have been languishing at their usual level. My explanation is best simplified as a moment of predictable unpredictability. As healthcare professionals, our role is to recognize complexity, but distill this for the patient and treatment. Uncertainty is allowed. I don't know is not taboo. A good therapist is aware of complexity, but helps the patient build a simple strategy. The purpose of the story is to give meaning. No one wants to be statistic. No one likes to be afflicted seemingly at random. Their system's approach is not as concerned with answers as it is context and meaning. Not that answers are always elusive, but they exist within a personal context, like red flags. To give someone answers a robot would do, to help someone find meaning requires a human. Even in the presence of a trigger, the wider context should not be abandoned. We can be a catalyst for people to embark on smoking cessation, weight loss, returning to exercise, buying weights, weaning off long-term opioids, starting appropriate medication for other disease, or timely further investigation. Indeed, these are the patients who are most likely to describe significant life changes, which I bet is a large reason most of us are in this vocation. But we need to stop reducing our thought process to a single component and instead consider wider health, which extends into individual, psychological, social, spiritual factors. Be more human, be less robot. Neil Maltby. Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. The show notes for this episode and much, much more can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. If you found value in this conversation, please share this with one other person that could benefit. And until next time, do not forget to stay funky.